Charlotte was a woman who lived her life in the fast lane. Every day she rushed through her routine, focused on her job as a marketing executive at a prestigious company. She didn't have much time for anything else. For her, success meant climbing the corporate ladder, moving from one meeting to the next and always staying ahead of the competition. Her world was built on the belief that everything she needed was already within her reach, if she worked hard enough. She had the luxury of the best apartments, the newest gadgets, and the latest fashions. Her social life consisted of high-profile events, fancy dinners, and business gatherings. She surrounded herself with successful, ambitious people who had the same goals and lifestyle. In her mind, this was the life she had worked hard for, and she wasn't about to let anything get in the way. The building where she worked was one of the tallest in the city. It was sleek, modern, and full of glass windows that gave a breathtaking view of the skyline. Inside, everything was polished and pristine. The floors were always spotless, the hallways well lit, and the elevators always on time. It was a place where every detail was meticulously managed, and Charlotte loved it. Yet amidst all the luxury and glamour, there was one part of the building Charlotte never really paid attention to: the lobby. It was a place where people rushed in and out, sometimes stopping to check their phones or grab a quick coffee. It wasn't glamorous or busy enough to catch her attention, and so she passed through it every day without a second thought. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, Charlotte was leaving the office later than usual. She was tired, but she still had a few things on her mind: an email she needed to send, a presentation she needed to prepare for, and the never-ending list of tasks that came with her job. As she walked through the lobby, her mind was occupied with the weight of it all. But then something unusual caught her eye. In the corner of the lobby, near a dusty old grand piano, stood the building's janitor. He was a man who always seemed to blend into the background, someone Charlotte rarely noticed. She had seen him before, of course. He was the one who mopped the floors, emptied the trash, and made sure the building was always spotless. He was always polite, always silent, but never someone she felt the need to acknowledge. That day, however, was different. The janitor, whom Charlotte had never really thought twice about, was standing by the piano, his eyes focused on the keys. She could see him wiping his hands on his uniform, perhaps preparing to clean the area. But then, without any warning, he sat down on the piano bench, his fingers brushing the keys gently. Charlotte couldn't help but stop. It wasn't the sound of the piano itself that caught her attention. It was the way he sat at it, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he placed his hands on the keys. "Could you play that thing?" Charlotte asked, a playful tone in her voice. She had always been someone who liked to joke around, especially when things got a little too serious or boring. She raised an eyebrow and smiled. "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you." The words came out of her mouth without much thought. It was just a throwaway comment, a light-hearted joke to entertain herself. She didn't expect him to take it seriously. In fact, she didn't even expect him to respond. She just wanted to laugh and move on. It was a comment made in passing, one that was forgotten the moment it left her lips. But then, something strange happened. The janitor's face remained calm, almost expressionless. He didn't laugh at the joke or roll his eyes as she expected. Instead, he simply smiled. It wasn't a large, beaming smile, it was subtle, as if he understood something that Charlotte didn't. Without a word, he began to play. At first, it was a soft melody, barely audible over the hum of the building. Charlotte, who had been prepared to move on, found herself frozen in place. The music was simple, but there was something captivating about it. She hadn't expected this quiet man who cleaned up after everyone else, playing the piano with such grace. She watched him as his fingers moved across the keys. It wasn't anything fancy, no dramatic chords or complicated patterns, but it was beautiful. The sound filled the space around them, soft and rich at the same time. It was like the music was telling a story that Charlotte couldn't quite understand but felt drawn to nonetheless. For a few moments, she forgot about everything else, the long workday, the emails, the meetings that were still waiting for her attention. It was as if the world around her had disappeared, and all that remained was the man at the piano and the music he played. There was something incredibly peaceful about it, something that Charlotte had been missing in her own life. The music seemed to speak to her in a way she hadn't expected. It was quiet and simple, yet it carried a weight that resonated deep inside her. Charlotte wasn't sure why, but she felt something stir within her, an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a mix of wonder, confusion, and a sense of connection to this man who had been invisible to her until now. She stayed there for a while, listening to him play, before the sound slowly faded into silence. The janitor stopped, his fingers resting on the keys as he looked up at her. Charlotte was at a loss for words. She had no idea what to say, or if she should even say anything at all. The moment had been so unexpected, so unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had come into the building that evening thinking about work, but now she was leaving with a completely different perspective. "Wow," was all she managed to say, her voice soft. "You're good." He smiled again, but this time there was something more in his smile. It wasn't just polite. It was almost knowing, like he understood exactly what had just happened. He stood up from the piano and nodded, as if the performance had been nothing more than a simple gift offered with no expectation in return. Charlotte turned and walked towards the door, still trying to process what had just occurred. She wasn't sure what had happened or why it felt so significant, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't be able to look at that janitor the same way again. As she stepped out into the night, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted in some subtle way. She didn't know it yet, but that simple moment in the lobby, with the janitor playing his piano, would become a turning point she would never forget. The next day, Charlotte found herself walking through the building's lobby with an unexpected sense of curiosity. She hadn't thought about the janitor much since the night before, but as she passed through the familiar entrance, something made her look over at the corner where the piano stood. It was empty. The piano sat quietly, untouched, and for a brief moment Charlotte felt a wave of disappointment. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but part of her had hoped to see him again, to hear the music that had caught her so off guard. She shook her head, wondering why she was even thinking about it. After all, he was just the janitor, wasn't he? But as she moved toward the elevator, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see him, Henry, as she had learned his name was, pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway. He looked up, their eyes meeting for a brief second. For a moment, neither of them said anything. There was an awkward silence between them, as if both of them were unsure of how to continue after the unexpected encounter the night before. "Good morning," Charlotte said, her voice a little more tentative than usual. She didn't want to seem too eager or strange, but she couldn't help the curiosity that was bubbling up inside her. Henry nodded in response, his face still calm, though there was a slight warmth in his eyes. "Morning," he replied simply, his voice steady and polite, just as it always was. He didn't seem bothered by the previous night's exchange, nor did he seem uncomfortable. Charlotte hesitated for a moment, then decided to break the silence. "I didn't expect to see you here this morning," she said. "I thought you might be, I don't know, taking a break or something." He smiled faintly, but there was no hint of pride in it, just a quiet acknowledgement. "I work here," he said. "The piano is just a place to pause for a minute." It was a simple reply, but something about the way he said it made Charlotte feel like she had misunderstood something. She had assumed that the piano, like so many things in the building, was just a decoration, a nice touch to make the place look more elegant. She hadn't considered that it might be something more, something personal to him. As they stood there, talking in the quiet lobby, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder why he had chosen this building to work in. There were plenty of other places he could have been, places that might have offered more than a job cleaning office floors. She knew it was none of her business, but her curiosity was starting to get the better of her. "So," she said, trying to sound casual. "Do you play often?" Henry gave a slight shrug. "Whenever I can." Charlotte thought about how he had played the night before, almost as though the music had been a release, something he needed to do, not just for himself but maybe for others too. She couldn't quite explain it, but something about the way he played made her feel connected to him in a way she hadn't expected. "I've never heard anyone play like that," Charlotte said, almost without thinking. She knew it wasn't just the music itself that had caught her off guard. It was the way it had made her feel. It was the fact that someone she had barely noticed, someone who seemed so ordinary, could create something so beautiful. Henry's eyes softened at her words, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he turned slightly and began to push his cart down the hall, continuing with his work. Charlotte stood there for a moment, feeling the silence between them once more. She wanted to ask him more questions, to learn about the man behind the piano, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the fact that she wasn't used to talking to someone like him, or maybe it was because she wasn't sure if she was ready to confront the way she had been, judging him in the past. That day passed much like any other. Charlotte went through her usual work routine, responding to emails, meeting with clients, and pushing herself to keep up with the demands of her job. But as the day wore on, she found that her thoughts kept drifting back to Henry and the piano. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the way the music had felt the night before, how it had shifted something inside her. She had always been focused on her career, always striving for success and perfection, but now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a strange longing for something more. It was as if Henry's music had opened a door in her heart, a door she hadn't even known was there. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like something had changed in her, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. The next day, Charlotte arrived at the office earlier than usual. She found herself walking through the lobby again, her heart quickening as she looked over at the piano. This time Henry was there. He wasn't playing, but he was standing next to the instrument, his head down as he cleaned the nearby windows. Without thinking, Charlotte approached him. "Hey," she said, feeling a bit more confident now. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to play for me again sometime." Henry looked up, surprised. His gaze met hers for a brief moment before he nodded. "Sure," he said. "I don't mind," she smiled, feeling a little silly for asking. But at the same time, there was a sense of excitement that bubbled up inside her. She wasn't sure why she was so eager to hear him play again, but she knew she wanted to. "Thanks," she said, her voice quieter than usual, and with that, she turned and walked to the elevator, her heart racing. As she stepped inside, she realized something. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she knew she wasn't the same person she had been just a few days ago. Something had shifted in her, something she hadn't expected, and she couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Over the next few days, Charlotte found herself looking forward to her encounters with Henry. Every time she passed through the lobby, she hoped to hear the soft notes of the piano drifting through the air, and whenever she saw him, her thoughts would wander to the music he had played, to the mystery that surrounded him. It wasn't just the piano that intrigued her. It was him. She began to realize that there was more to Henry than she had ever given him credit for. He wasn't just the janitor who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash. He was a man with a past, with a story she hadn't heard yet, and with a talent she had overlooked. And as the days passed, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to learn something that would change her life forever. But for now, all she could do was wait and wonder. She didn't know how or why, but she knew that something had begun, and she wasn't ready to let it go just yet. The days after Charlotte's first request for Henry to play the piano again seemed to stretch on endlessly. She went through her usual work routine, her mind preoccupied with the tasks at hand, but there was always a small part of her that felt a pull toward the lobby. She began taking a longer route through the building just so she could pass the piano, hoping to hear a few notes, hoping to catch a glimpse of the quiet janitor who had, in such a short time, managed to stir something inside her. It wasn't just the music that was on her mind anymore. It was him too. She found herself wondering about his life, about who he was beyond the man who pushed the cleaning cart and made sure the office building was spotless. She knew almost nothing about him. She had never taken the time to know him, and now for some reason she couldn't stop thinking about it. The thought was both confusing and exciting. Charlotte was used to knowing everything about the people in her life, especially the people who had an impact on her day-to-day existence. Her colleagues, her clients, even her friends, they all had stories, backgrounds, and aspirations she was familiar with. But Henry, he was a mystery. A week passed and Charlotte hadn't seen him play again. Each day she made sure to stop by the lobby, sometimes just glancing over to see if he was near the piano, but he was always busy with his cleaning duties. There were times when she caught him looking at the piano as he worked, his eyes lingering on it for just a moment before he moved on with his tasks. But he never played. It was on a Friday afternoon as the sun was beginning to set and the light outside cast a warm glow through the glass windows of the lobby that Charlotte saw him again. She had just finished her last meeting of the week, and as she walked toward the elevator, her eyes drifted to the piano. This time Henry wasn't cleaning. He was sitting at the bench, his hands resting on the keys, looking lost in thought. She stopped in her tracks. Her heart quickened, and for a moment she felt a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it was here. But she wasn't sure what to do with it. Should she approach him? Should she say something? Or should she just leave him to his music? Before she could make up her mind, Henry looked up and saw her standing there staring at him. He smiled, but it wasn't the same polite smile he had given her before. This time there was something more in it, a sense of recognition, maybe even a bit of warmth. "Do you want to hear me play?" he asked, his voice soft but clear. There was no hesitation in his tone, no awkwardness, just a quiet invitation. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to rush over and sit beside him, to hear the music again, but another part of her was still unsure. She didn't want to impose on him, especially since she knew so little about him, but as she stood there staring at him, she realized that there was something more important happening here than just music. There was a connection, an unspoken understanding that had been growing between them ever since that night he had played for her. "Yes," she finally said, her voice a little shaky but full of anticipation. "I'd love to hear you play." Henry nodded and began to play. The soft, familiar melody filled the air, and Charlotte felt herself drawn to the sound. It wasn't just the music that captivated her. It was the way he played, the way his hands moved with such ease and grace over the keys. It was as if the piano was an extension of him, as if he was telling a story without saying a word. The music was beautiful, but it was more than that. It was raw. It was real. It was as though Henry was opening up a part of himself that he had kept hidden from the world. Each note seemed to speak to Charlotte, each chord resonating deep inside her. It was as though she was hearing a language she had never understood before. But now it was clear to her. This was Henry's language, and he was sharing it with her. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the music to wash over her. When she opened them again, she saw Henry's face, calm and focused, lost in the music. For a moment, it was as if they were the only two people in the world. As the song came to a close, Henry's fingers lingered on the keys for a few seconds before he stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Charlotte found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to say something. "Thank you for listening," Henry said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, almost as if he wasn't sure whether she had enjoyed it or not. Charlotte couldn't help herself. She smiled. "That was incredible," she said, her voice full of admiration. "I didn't know you could play like that." Henry looked down at the piano, a faint blush creeping onto his cheeks. "I used to play more," he said, his voice quiet. "Before life, before everything changed." Charlotte didn't press him for details. She didn't need to know the specifics. She could tell by the way he spoke that there was more to his story than he was willing to share at that moment. But she could also see that this music, this piano, was a part of him, something he had held on to even when everything else seemed to slip away. For a moment, they both sat in silence. Charlotte wanted to ask him more about his past, about the music, about why he had stopped playing for so long, but she didn't. She wasn't sure if it was the right time. So instead, she simply sat there with him, letting the quietness between them speak for itself. Finally, she stood up, breaking the spell. "I should probably get going," she said, not wanting to seem like she was overstaying her welcome. Henry nodded, standing up as well. "Of course," he said. "I'll see you around." Charlotte smiled and turned to leave, but as she walked toward the elevator, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had come into the building that day expecting nothing more than another busy workday, but what she had found instead was something she hadn't even known she was looking for. There was a calmness inside her now, a quiet understanding that hadn't been there before. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she had found something real, something worth holding on to. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she realized that she was no longer just passing through this building, moving from one task to the next. Now she was living in the moments in between, the moments where the music played, where the connection was made, where the unexpected could happen. And as the elevator began its ascent, Charlotte knew that whatever came next, it was going to be different. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she was ready to find out. The days that followed Charlotte's quiet moment in the lobby were filled with a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the music that stayed with her, but the feeling of connection that had started to blossom between her and Henry. She couldn't quite explain it, but there was something different now, something that had shifted in the way she saw the world, and more importantly, in the way she saw Henry. She began arriving a little earlier each morning, just so she could pass through the lobby and see if he was there. Every time she saw him, she tried to strike up a conversation, but it was always brief. He wasn't the type of man who shared much about himself. Still, there was something about the way he responded that made Charlotte want to know more. The conversations they had were simple. They'd talk about the weather, or sometimes she'd ask him about his favorite composers or the music he enjoyed. He'd answer in a quiet, thoughtful way, but he never seemed to go into detail about himself. It was as though he was guarding a part of him, a part he wasn't ready to share. And that made Charlotte even more curious. One morning, Charlotte was sitting in the lobby waiting for her meeting to start. As usual, Henry was there, quietly cleaning around the piano. She found herself watching him, not in the same dismissive way she used to, but with a newfound respect. It wasn't just the fact that he could play the piano, it was the way he carried himself. He wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't need to be. He was content with who he was, and that quiet confidence was something Charlotte admired more than she realized. She was about to turn away and check her watch when Henry looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For a second, she thought he was going to start playing, but instead he gave her a small nod acknowledging her presence. "Good morning," she said, offering a smile. "Morning," he replied, his tone steady and warm. "How's your day going?" Charlotte shrugged. "Busy as usual," she said with a half smile. "But I can't complain." Henry gave a small smile of his own. "Busy's good. Keeps the mind sharp." Charlotte nodded. "True. Sometimes, though, I wish I could slow down a little. Take a step back." He looked at her for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "You should. Life's too short to rush all the time. Sometimes you have to take a breath and just listen." The way he said it made Charlotte stop and think. She had been running from one thing to the next for so long that she had stopped listening to herself, stopped paying attention to what she really needed. There was truth in his words, truth she wasn't sure she wanted to face just yet. She opened her mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing. Her meeting was in 15 minutes. "I've got to run," she said, offering him another smile. "But maybe I'll stop by later?" Henry nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll be here." As Charlotte walked toward the elevator, she felt a sense of longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she needed to do, something she needed to understand about herself and about him. She had been so focused on her career, so obsessed with achieving the next big thing that she had neglected the parts of her life that really mattered. The music, the conversations, the moments of quiet connection. Those were the things that truly nourished her soul. Over the next week, Charlotte found herself looking forward to her brief exchanges with Henry. They were simple, casual moments, but they meant something to her. She began to realize that she had been living her life in a way that didn't make room for these small, meaningful moments. She had been so focused on what was next, on climbing the ladder, that she had missed out on the things that really made life worth living. One afternoon, Charlotte decided to take a break from her usual routine. She stepped into the lobby, hoping to catch Henry in one of his quiet moments by the piano. As she walked in, she saw him sitting there, his fingers lightly resting on the keys. It wasn't the grand, dramatic playing from before. It was soft, almost as if he was lost in thought. Without a word, Charlotte sat down beside him. Henry didn't seem surprised, but he didn't stop playing either. The music filled the space around them, gentle and soothing. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, just letting the melody wash over her. She didn't need to speak. The music was saying everything that needed to be said. When the song ended, Henry finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. Charlotte smiled, a little taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. "I'm glad I came," she replied. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what you said before." Henry raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What did I say?" "About listening," Charlotte said softly. "You were right. I've been running around so much I forgot how to listen. To myself, to the people around me. It's like I've been missing the point." He didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he just watched her, as though trying to gauge whether she really meant what she said. "You're not the only one," he finally said, his voice low. "We all get caught up in our own lives, in the noise. But sometimes the most important things are the quiet moments, the ones where you stop and listen, not just to the world, but to what's inside you." Charlotte looked at him, feeling a sense of gratitude that she couldn't quite explain. She had come here looking for something, but she hadn't realized, until now, that what she was looking for wasn't a thing, it was a feeling. A sense of peace, of clarity. For the first time in what felt like ages, she wasn't rushing. She wasn't thinking about her job or the next big thing. She was just here, in this moment, with someone who understood. "Henry," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "I don't know what it is, but something about this. About you. It feels right. I feel like I've been missing something, and now, I don't know. I feel like I'm starting to find it." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression still calm but softening. "Sometimes you don't find it all at once. It's a process. You take a step, then another, until one day you realize you're somewhere you never thought you'd be." Charlotte nodded, understanding more than she had before. "I think I'm ready for that. I think I'm ready to slow down, to listen, to live differently." Henry smiled, and for the first time Charlotte saw something in his eyes, something more than just quiet resolve. There was warmth there, a quiet acknowledgement of something shared between them. "Good," he said. "You're on the right path." As Charlotte left the building that evening, her heart felt lighter. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't worried about it. She had taken the first step in a new direction, and for once she felt content to simply be where she was. The weeks that followed were different. Charlotte began to feel like she was waking up from a long, restless sleep. The rush of her usual days, the endless meetings and emails, no longer consumed her as they once did. She found herself taking more time for the small moments, the moments where she could truly breathe and listen. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and now she could see the world in a way she never had before. Henry had become a steady part of her life, though neither of them had yet put a label on their relationship. Their interactions remained simple, quiet, but meaningful. They had long conversations during their brief encounters in the lobby, about everything from music to life's little mysteries. Charlotte had learned more about Henry's past during those conversations, though he never went into great detail. He spoke of his time as a young man who had once dreamed of performing on grand stages, but life had a way of pushing those dreams aside. He had learned to find peace in the quieter moments, in the music that still lived in his heart. Charlotte admired his resilience, his ability to carry on with such grace despite the setbacks life had thrown his way. There was a humility about him, a quiet strength that made her want to know more. She began to look forward to their talks, to the moments where she could sit beside him while he played the piano, letting the music fill the space between them. One evening, after a particularly long workday, Charlotte found herself walking through the lobby, eager to hear Henry play. The building was nearly empty, and the soft glow of the evening light filtered in through the glass windows, casting a warm, golden hue over the lobby. As she approached the piano, she saw Henry sitting there, as he often did, his fingers lightly touching the keys. There was something about that moment that felt different. It wasn't just the music. It was the way Henry looked at her when he saw her. There was a quiet recognition in his eyes, a connection that had grown between them over time. Charlotte felt it too. A pull that she couldn't ignore, a feeling she had never expected. Without a word, Henry began to play. The music flowed effortlessly from his fingers, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, letting the melody wash over her. It was a song she had never heard before, but it felt familiar, as if it spoke to something deep inside her. The notes seemed to tell a story of longing, of hope, of finding beauty in the simplest of things. When the song ended, Charlotte opened her eyes and found Henry watching her. His gaze was gentle, but there was something more in it, something that made her heart skip a beat. For the first time, she felt like she could truly understand him, not just through the music, but through the quiet moments they shared. "That was beautiful," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Henry nodded, his fingers resting on the piano keys. "It's just a piece I've been working on. It's not finished yet, but sometimes it's the imperfections that make the music special." Charlotte smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "I think it's perfect," she said. "It feels like it's meant for this moment." There was a long pause between them, a silence that spoke volumes. Charlotte could feel her heart racing, and she realized that something had shifted inside her. The feelings she had for Henry were no longer just about admiration for his music or his quiet strength. They were deeper now, something more personal, something that went beyond their shared moments. "I've been thinking a lot," Charlotte said, her voice trembling slightly. "About what you said. About listening." Henry looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "I've spent so much of my life rushing from one thing to the next," she said, taking a deep breath. "I've been so focused on what comes next that I've forgotten how to live in the moment. I've forgotten how to listen to the world around me, to the people around me, to you." Henry's eyes softened and he nodded slowly. "Sometimes it takes stepping back to hear what's truly important." Charlotte looked down at her hands for a moment, her thoughts racing. She had spent so much of her life trying to control everything, trying to build a future that was perfect. But now, sitting here with Henry, she realized that she had been missing something vital. She had been missing the simple, quiet moments that truly mattered, the moments of connection, of understanding, of just being present. "I think I've been running away from what matters most," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to anymore." Henry didn't say anything for a moment. He simply sat there, looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. "I don't want to run away either," he said quietly. "Sometimes we need someone to remind us of what's important, to show us that it's okay to slow down." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't want to hold back anymore. She had spent so much time hiding behind the walls she had built around herself. But now she wanted to be vulnerable, to share everything she had been holding inside. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'm scared of what happens next. I don't know what I'm doing or if I'm making the right choice. But I know one thing. I don't want to do this alone." Henry's eyes softened, and for the first time, Charlotte saw a hint of vulnerability in him too. He had always been the quiet, steady one, the one who carried the weight of the world with grace. But in that moment, she realized that he too had his own fears, his own struggles. "You're not alone," Henry said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You don't have to be." Charlotte's heart swelled, and without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone in the world. She felt like she had found someone who understood her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. "I don't know where this is going," Charlotte said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I want to find out with you." Henry didn't hesitate. He gave her a small, sincere smile. "I'd like that." As they sat there, hand in hand, the world outside seemed to fade away. For the first time, Charlotte felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The future was uncertain, but for once she wasn't afraid of it. She had found something real, something that was worth holding on to, and she was ready to embrace it no matter where it led. The music played softly in the background, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life aren't the grand moments, but the quiet, simple ones that we often overlook. And in that moment, Charlotte knew that whatever came next, she would face it with Henry by her side, ready to listen, to love, and to live in the present.